I can't really say Happy Memorial Day, but Blessed Memorial Day. Are we all set back there, Aretha? Okay. I want to talk to you about the presence of God. Many years ago, I was on a committee, and I got an invite, and it said, "Your presence is requested," but it was spelled like Christmas presents. And so I showed up with a little present. Couldn't let it go. The pictures are Creative Commons for the most part. Please do not sue us for using your copyrighted materials. We are doing nonprofit stuff with them. Okay, this is a painting of the temple, which was not built yet in our narrative. It wasn't built until after the death of David. But the Ark of the Covenant was in that temple, and when the temple was dedicated, the glory of God, the Shekinah of glory of God, the presence of God, like was on this tabernacle in the time of Moses, the pillar of fire at night and the cloud during the day. And when the cloud lifted, they would move on, whether they stayed a day or 2 months or 3 years, however long the cloud was on the Ark of the Covenant, that's when they would follow, as soon as it moved. And sometimes we have to, we get a little bit sedentary and we don't want to move on when God is doing a new thing. But I think that's a human characteristic. So I want to talk about the presence of God and the fearfulness of the presence of God and the danger of not giving heed to the presence of God. So if you would advance that, please, to the next slide. And I will get my slideshow going here. Hey, how are we doing on the thing so where I can do it from here? Are you working on that, Riley? Tally's working on it? Okay, I'll get after him. Slideshow from the beginning. Okay, now let me remind you of a narrative that occurred in the beginning of 1 Samuel that we talked about probably last May, because we've been going through this since last May. We're about a year into it. And in the beginning of the book of 1 Samuel, the Israelites, they had a war with the Philistines, and Eli and his sons thought it was a good idea to take the Ark of the Covenant, which I hope you understand what the Ark of the Covenant is, the place on which the fire and the glory cloud rested in the time of Moses many years earlier. And they brought the Ark of the Covenant. After they defeated Israel, they brought it in and they placed it in their temple to Dagon, which is like a fish god. And the first day, Dagon fell down before it, and then the second day he fell down before it, and his hands and his head were broken off. And so the moral of the story is that God can take care of his own ark. Thank you. So we already understand that when we come to talk about the story today. So it was told King David, the Lord has, wait a minute, where am I here? That sucker is out of order. Go to the next slide. David gathered the chosen men of Israel, 30,000, and all the people with him set out and went from Baal, Judah, to bring up the Ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. So we come to a later story. David has now become king of all Israel, all 12 tribes. And so previously in his battles, he has several hundred men in his battles when he's fighting with the Philistines and the different ones. Now all Israel has come to him, and now he has a much larger army, an army of 30,000 people at his command. And so he decides that he's going to go and get the Ark of the Covenant and bring it to Jerusalem, which he has just conquered Zion within Jerusalem. And so he gathers his chosen men. And notice what it says about the Ark of God. Now here we have, when it's translated God in this place, it's Elohim, which it means the God who is singular but plural. The ordinary word for God in their time. And so the Ark of God, which is called by the name the Lord of Hosts. Now this literally in the Hebrew language means Yahweh, the God of war. They're in a time of peace at this time, and yet the ark is called by the name of Yahweh, which is I am that I am, the name revealed to Moses many hundreds of years earlier, the eternal existence of God who fights his own battles, the God who is and who was and who always will be. And he's enthroned on the cherubim, which is an angel. We think of a cherub as a sweet little baby. The pictures of little cherubs and stuff. And I'm going to show you a picture where somebody in the time past did their rendition of what the ark is, and they've got those little babies on the top of it because they don't understand what a cherubim was. But they're the mighty angels of God, and the throne of God is on the wings of the cherubim, on the wings of the angels. And so all of the nations that were around, they worshiped Dagon and Baal and Ashtaroth and all the different gods that we see in the Old Testament. But the children of Israel worshiped a God that could not be seen. They didn't worship the Ark of the Covenant. That did not represent God to them. The Ark of the Covenant represented the place from which the invisible God, which at times appears as a fire and at times appears as a cloud, that's the God. In fact, years and years later, when some of the Syrians came into the temple of God and they found nothing. And so they spread the rumor that Jews were atheists because there was no idol in there to worship when they went in. They interpreted the situation with their own understanding of what a God is. Our God is a mighty God. Our God is an invisible God. Our God is a God that can take care of himself. And so here we have the decision of David to go and get this ark. Now you'll remember previously the ark had gone into the Philistines and they got hemorrhoids and they got all kinds of problems. And they sent the ark back because they asked their wise men, why are these bad things, why are these plagues happening to us? Why are we in bad shape? And their people said, well, it's because you took the ark of the God of Israel and you need to send it back. And they said, well, we can't really send it back without an offering. And so they made the golden mice and the golden hemorrhoids and sent it back with those inside. And so it was taken and it was placed in the house of a certain person. And many years have now elapsed since it was put there, because all the time we've been talking about David's had his own people and he's fighting his own battles and the other tribes are against him and Saul's chasing him around the world and they're fighting with each other. Now we've come to the place where all Israel is united, and so they decide it's time to bring this thing up to Jerusalem. We've conquered Jerusalem. Excuse me one second. I would like this to last throughout the sermon, so I'm going to plug it in. Tally ordinarily takes care of this for me. Tally takes care of a lot of the details around here. He's one of the unseen workers. So, they go to get the Ark of God, and God is enthroned on this piece of furniture. He's enthroned on the cherubim. And so, I've talked about this before, but let me just mention, in the olden days when the tabernacle was up and Moses was still alive, and the whole idea of the three tribes on the north and three tribes on the east and three tribes on the west and so forth, the idea is that the religion of the Hebrews is centripetal. We know what centrifugal is when we take a bucket of water and we spin it around like this, and the water stays in because of the force that pushes it out. And so the religion of the Jews is centripetal. The religion of the Christians is centrifugal. They worshipped one place from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria. It's the opposite. So, just to mention that for no extra charge. Next slide, please. They carried the Ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Very specific. You know, these things are historical. I mean, they're very specific with details. Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart. Well, how do you drive a cart? Did it have a steering wheel or gas pedal or anything else? I mean, if you go to different places such as India, you'll see oxen carrying a cart, and there'll be somebody walking alongside of it with a switch to keep the guy going. And so the two sons of the person who had charge of the Ark of the Covenant, they built a new cart. I'm sure they had some sort of conversation like, well, the Philistines sent this old cart many years ago, and it's had a flat tire, and it's a little bit wobbly, and this is God's throne, and so we should probably build a new cart. And so they built a new one, and they're driving it along. They're coming downhill, it says, because it was on the hill, and away they go. Those are some oxen, aren't they? And Ahio went in front of the ark, and David and all the house of Israel were dancing before the Lord with all their might, with songs, with lyre, harps, tambourines, castanets, and cymbals. What's a castanet? Yeah, it's on your hand, a little piece of wood, and they're dancing around. They're like over at Elam or at Zion. I can't imagine many of you. Maybe you do the dance at church. We don't. The kids do the dancing here, but they were really dancing. They really had the music going on. They had a wonderful time. They were absolutely overjoyed with the fact that they're taking us up to Jerusalem, and they might have been waving flags or whatever it is they felt like doing. However, the Lord led them. And in one of the pictures that I'll show you in a bit, one of the artist renderings, there were people that were falling on their face before God, and everything was really cool. It was a time of rejoicing like they had not seen in their lifetime. Everybody's together, and not only is Zion the political capital of the world, but Zion is about to become the religious capital of the world. All the things that had been promised, all the prophecies of Samuel were about to come to fruition. You like that? Next slide, please. So they came to the threshing floor of Nacon. Now, Nacon means, in the Hebrew language, to be firm, to be stable, to be established. They're on their way. They come by this farmer's place, this farmer who has probably done a lot of work. He has to go out and he has to sow the seed. He has to break up the fallow ground. He has to go out and sow the seed. He has to wait until the seed comes to fruition. He has to go out and chop it down. And then he has to bring the wheat to the threshing floor. And then he has to let his oxen step on it and go around. Usually they had a thing in the middle where they hook an ox to it so the ox would go around and thresh out the grain. That law that Paul mentioned, shall not muzzle an ox when it threshes out the grain. And so they come to this place of stability, to this place of threshing. Now, have you ever been threshed?
Yep.
Has God ever put you in a place where you felt like you were being stepped on? You know what that's for? That's to separate the wheat from the chaff. Now, Jesus told two parables. He did the parable about the wheat and the tares. The tares are plants that are not fruitful. But when he tells about the wheat and the chaff, that's about our individual lives. When we have fruit, there's also on our fruit chaff that has to be removed. Things in our lives that need to be changed. And so that's what is going on in this particular threshing floor. And the threshing floor is said to be the threshing floor of establishment, of stability. Now, if you look, can you see that? I don't know if you can see that up there, but the heads on the Ark of the Covenant are little cherubs, like you see the pictures of the little baby, the cute little babies. But that's how the artist saw it. Next slide, please. Jesus said this, his winnowing fork is in his hand. He will thoroughly clear the threshing floor. He will gather his wheat into the barn. He will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. This is not people. This is the crap in our lives that needs to be removed. So, this is how Jesus mentioned it. Here we have a picture of a man somewhere, maybe Africa or somewhere, and he's taking this wheat, and the idea is that he uses the winnowing fork. It's been all stepped on, and the chaff and the wheat have been removed, and he throws it up, and the wheat falls back to the threshing floor, and the prevailing wind takes the chaff away. And then on the other side, it has to be raked up and burned in the end. And so David didn't really realize that he still had to go through some things. There was some things wrong with David, and we'll see, in the rest of the weeks as we go on, there were some issues in his life. And so this is what one threshing floor looks like here on the right. This is an ancient one. And so the cart comes, the two priests, the sons of the priest, they're coming along, they're driving the cart along to the place of stability. And at the place of stability, the cart begins to tip. The best laid plans of mice and men often go astray. What do you do? A few years ago on Memorial Day, we had an event. We have an event every year here. And at the end of the event, somebody fell over and an ambulance had to be called. Remember that, Jack? It disrupted the whole thing. We were going to have a parade to go down to the cemetery and say some prayers, and somebody was going to make some speeches down there. We had some speeches up here, and all of a sudden everybody's standing around a poor woman that, I don't know if she tripped. I think she did. I think it was an instability thing, and she tripped and she fell, and the ambulance had to come, and it messed everything up. And so what happens at the threshing floor? Uzzah reached out his hand to the Ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen shook it. Now, this guy's name, well, I won't mention his name now. This guy reached his hand, Uzzah reached out and touched it. Well, the Philistines took it in battle. They took it to their temple. Nobody was struck dead. They put it before Dagon. Dagon was struck dead. The idol was struck dead. There were some problems with the hemorrhoids that broke out on the people, and they sent the mice back, so we assume that it was some sort of case of bubonic plague broke out in their community because they had it there. But it was brought prior to that, it was in Eli's house, Eli and Hophni and Phinehas, and they adopted Samuel when Hannah brought him and dedicated him to the Lord, and they had no room for Samuel, so where did they put him? They put him in the room with the Ark of the Covenant, and he slept there. It was his bedroom. He's sleeping there one night, and God says, Samuel. Samuel, you know the story. He gets up and goes to Eli. What do you want? I didn't say anything, Eli said. Go back to sleep. And so 3 times finally, the Lord speaks from this place and from which he's enthroned and tells Samuel that God is about to do some terrific and scary things. And Samuel becomes God's prophet as a child and begins to speak to Eli. You know the story of Samuel. He was the kingmaker. He was the last judge, and he was the kingmaker, and he was, the one that transitioned to the time of Saul. And so this guy, Uzzah, he's in a place where it's said to be a stable place, and Uzzah reaches out and touches it. Dead. Now, I don't know about you. I don't like this story. Do you? And I try to figure out, okay, what happened here? Maybe he just had a heart attack, and let me go through these things and understand that I'm just postulating here, and I'm not saying that this is the way it is. Maybe he just had a heart attack, and the people interpreted because he was afraid that the thing was going to fall on him, and he reached up, and it did fall on him and killed him. Maybe it was just an interpretation thing. Maybe it really did kill him, and the people around just thought that God killed him. Or the author understood exactly what happened, and God struck him dead. Which is it? I mean, that's what it says. The other brother was on the other side of the thing, and obviously he's not going to grab it and try and pull it back. You know how much that thing weighed? Holy moly, it was like 3 feet long and 2 feet wide and 4 inches thick of gold it was heavy. You wouldn't want to be like a car falling on you, except that there wouldn't be any space for the tires underneath it. It would be just a huge solid hunk of gold, which, by the way, could not possibly be carried by people. That's why they put it on the cart. Now, if you were the guy who had kept this ark all these years, and there was a big party, and everybody was coming, 30,000 people it says, and they're going up to Jerusalem, they're going to take it up to Zion. I don't know how they're going to get up the hill, but eventually they got it up there somehow. Do you see this bell up there? I mean, that thing is 4 inches thick too. It says that was elevated up there with some difficulty. That's what it says in the church minutes. I'll bet it was. If you were the guy that had taken care of the ark all these years, and you were moving it up to Jerusalem because the country is coming into a unity, the United States of Israel, and you sent it off on a cart and one of your kids was killed coming down the hill, how would you feel about that? I mean, you have to think of the implication. When you read the Old Testament especially, you have to think of the implications of the story, how that affects people. Yuck. Next verse, 2 Samuel 6:7. Do we have it up there? The Lord's anger was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him there because he reached out his hand to the ark, and he died there beside the ark. It doesn't say he died under the ark. It says he died beside it. So it didn't really fall on him, according to the author. Next slide. And skip the next slide. Oh, there we go. One more. How about you? I've got this new thing that they sent me from T-Mobile. And I had Sprint, which I got a good signal here. And then T-Mobile bought Sprint, and then they said, you have to change your card, your SIM card, by the 1st of January, because if you don't change your SIM card, you're not going to have any service. So I believed them like a fool. And I put the new SIM card in, now I have no signal. And Ariel has the same phone, and she still has her Sprint SIM card in, and she has 3 bars. Don't put it in until they make you. So they said that they were going to send me a booster. And I said, what good will that do? I've got my Wi-Fi. They said, oh, it'll go for a mile. So they sent me this thing, and it's in a box, and it's in my room, and I'm afraid to hook it up, because I got an email that said, thank you for adding a new line. And I'm trying to find out if they're going to charge me for another line if I hook it up. So I haven't hooked it up. But if I am indeed getting this thing installed for free, there will be an instruction manual with it. Now, I don't know about you guys. I know you gals are probably more likely to look at the instructions. But guys are not likely to look at the instructions. Your wife is probably to say, well, you need to turn here according to the map. And you say, I know how to get there. And then you end up somewhere where you don't even know. Just ask Gene how he got to the church the first time he ever came here. We're not good at looking at instructions. It said, Sean, it said double click. And so I'm on the screen. Nothing. She said, push the button on the side. So I double clicked and it worked. I mean, there I had the instructions, but it didn't say double click the side button on the phone. It said double click the screen. So fortunately, she was here to help me with this. Thank you. So in the instruction manual in the book of Moses, chapter 2, 25:12 through 14, you shall cast 4 rings of gold for it and put them on its 4 feet, 2 rings on the one side and 2 rings on the other side. And you shall make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. And you shall put poles into the rings on the sides of the ark by which to carry the ark. This is how to move an ark. Simple. It's got to be acacia wood. That must be pretty strong wood. And it's got to be gold plated, and the rings, and you're going to put the poles through there. And if you want to know the whole chapter of the different information concerning the ark, it is in Exodus chapter 25. We don't have time for that today. And so this is how you move an ark. But you know what? They didn't want to move it that way. It's not that they didn't know, probably. Probably they did know. But that sucker was so heavy that they came up with, I'm sure God will be okay if we make a new ox cart and let the ox take it up. But the law says the priests have to carry it. Now, it was pretty heavy. And those poles had to be pretty long because 4 people could not carry it. The weight, I figured it out one time. I can't remember what I figured that top of that ark weighed. But if you take a bar of gold that big and then put solid angels on top, that's quite a lot of pounds. It's in the thousands. And so the priests were saying, we don't want to carry that thing. Would you? I mean, honestly, if we look at this thing critically, we see that we wouldn't want to do that either. Because, it would take the strongest young men, and it would probably take, on each corner, it would probably take at least 5 or 6 on each corner to carry that thing. You get the teamwork together and you can lift the car off the person that's fallen on. But here they had to go through this valley that I showed you last week, and then they had to climb up Zion Hill and get that thing up on top, and that was really, really impossible. And without the help of God, Christianity is impossible. If we don't have the grace of God, we can't do it. We need the supernatural strength. And I tried to find the verse. I could not find it this morning. I searched for it, but I know that it's in there somewhere. It says, and God helped the priests, and they lifted it later. Okay, next one, please. David was angry. With who? He was angry with God. He had all these plans, wonderful party, dancing, singing, castanets, and trumpets, and the crown on his kingship, the Ark of the Covenant, the ancient thing that Moses had left to them, coming into his place of residence, and he becomes a glorified king. And he's angry. Now, I can understand this. I've been angry a time or two when I thought that God wasn't doing exactly what I thought he should be doing. It's not been a case where, maybe somebody dropped dead in opposing it or something like that. But David becomes angry. It becomes like a train wreck. And it messes things up. Would you be angry? The next verse says, David was afraid. He's a very human person. How can the ark come into my care? That's a good question. How many people has he killed? How many adulteries has he committed? How many sins has he done? If all the anger of God comes upon Uzzah just for touching it, why would I want to take that into my house? I saw an episode of Judge Judy last week. You know this check scam where they call you up and they say, you've won X number of dollars and here's your check. You have to cash it and then put it in your bank account, and then you have to send me X number of dollars. You're familiar with that scam? Well, somebody got one of those checks and they decided, this doesn't seem just right. This is not what they said, but this is what, when you watch the show, this is what they thought. I wonder if this was going to mess up my checking account if I do this. And so they went to their friend and said, can I put this in your account? So he takes it, he sends it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. Now, Edom is an enemy of Israel. The Edomites are the sons of Esau. They're distant cousins of the Jews that live on the east of the Jordan. And he's also a Gittite, which means he's from Gath, or he lives in Gath, one or the other, a Philistine city. And so Obed-Edom, the scholars say this is one of the priests, but I can't imagine why a priest would name his kids like this. And so David sends the ark over to his place just to see what would happen. No. Am I right about this? And the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months. And the Lord blessed him and all his house. When dealing with the presence of God, it kind of depends on you. Depends on you. And apparently this guy's, he's okay with God. He had to have touched it. Can you imagine having this thing in your house and this huge piece of gold? What would this be worth today? 4 inches thick and 3 feet long and 18 inches wide, plus the angels. They had the value had to be in the several $100,000 in today's dollars, just the gold on it, or more. So God blesses him. And David says, well, maybe I could use this thing. Next slide. Samuel 6:13 and 14. And when those who bore the ark had gone 6 places, he sacrificed an ox and a fatling. They're going to carry it the way it should be carried, but they're not going to take any chances. They're going to offer an offering after they walk 6 paces. Okay, we're going to start the march now. Okay, before we go any further, we're going to have a sacrifice to God, and we're going to eat. And we're going to praise God for what he's done for us.
Take a nice break, too. Guys,
And David danced. I've never really been a dancer. In fact, even when I was a kid, if I went to the dance, I never danced. And if I went to a club, I never danced because that's just not me. David, on the other hand, he looked for any opportunity he could to dance. And he was a musician, and he brought all of these other players together so that they could have a big praise team. I don't know how there are some churches that don't have any music whatsoever. There are some churches in the South, some particular, called the Primitive Baptist churches, for one. They do not allow any musical instrument at all, voice only. And they say that that's the scriptural way. The Pentecostal Ukrainians, the only music that you can have in the church is the piano, because Moses said that. And if any church around them, if there's any sort of charismatic church around these Ukrainian Pentecostal churches, they judge them. Oh, look at how they've got musical instruments. But biblically speaking, any kind of instrument is fair game. It's part of the worship. Now, if we heard these songs that they sang on that day, we wouldn't like them. Have you ever heard Eastern music? I mean, it's minor key, and you just listen, Google some Indian music sometime. I remember Pastor Philip came one time, and he said, my wife is going to sing a song, and it was like Daryl Hannah and Splash. It was just terrible. But in their culture, that's what a good song sounded like. It doesn't. Those kind of cultures, they don't have rhythm, and they don't have drums or bass or anything like that. So David is dancing before the Lord with all his might, and he's girded with a linen ephod. Now this looks a little bit to me like stepping over the line. We know that there was a separation of power even back then, and as the kingdom began to be established, the priesthood is separate from the kingdom, and the prophets are separate from the kingdom, and the prophet can speak to the king, and the priest can pray for the king, but there was a separation of power. And David here puts on a linen ephod, which is the outfit in that day. It was like a clerical collar is today. Oh, there's a priest over there because he's got the collar. And so David puts on the priest's garment and goes ahead and begins to worship. And then I'll tell you what happened. Next slide, please. I'll tell you what happened next week. Okay, we're over a little bit, but if anybody has anything to say, we're right here. Okay, you can ask a question. I might not know the answer.
How did they get the ark on the cart?
They must have just had a whole bunch of people lift it up on there. It doesn't say. That's a good answer, Riley. I don't know. It doesn't say. Anyone else?
Talk about how difficult it was to get it where it was going, but they don't talk about how difficult it was to get it on the cart to begin with.
It must have been difficult.
So what came to mind to me was, I went back to 1 Samuel and read that where they took it up to the house of Abinadab. His other son, not the two that were with the ark when it was going back to Jerusalem, but another son was appointed to be the guardian of that ark, to guard it, protect it. And we don't hear about that son in this story when David is coming to get it.
Maybe the robbers got him.
So we don't hear it. But what came to mind is these boys, these sons that were living in that house, were living in a house where the ark was part of the furniture. And I think they got very complacent about the ark of God. They've lived with it for years, and it's part of the furniture.
Look at how my grandkids treat the church.
So, this is part of us as humans. Once our behavior is not corrected, that behavior is absolutely acceptable. We as humans, if nobody tells us that what we're doing is wrong or there's no consequence, then what we're doing is okay. With no sense in changing it. And yet here was David coming and treating the Ark of God like the sacred ark, seat of God that it was, with 30,000 people looking on, right? And God is, at this point, you get the indication that God is kind of okay with what's going on with the ark going to Jerusalem and being led with these 30,000 soldiers, and he even seems to be okay with it being on an ark because there was no consequence at that point. But what he was not okay with was this disrespect, this action where Uzzah had become so complacent, and now he's in front of all these people, right? He's the son of the priest, and he's in front of all these people, and the ark, number one, even if the ark was getting ready to fall, he couldn't have stopped it. But he just pushed his hand out. Now, I think he did it for show. He did it because I'm important. I was given the privilege of walking beside this piece of furniture that's been in my house for years and years and years. And let me just make sure everything's okay. And I think it was that complacency, that irreverence, that God got angry about, is you don't understand who I am. You have become so complacent with this that you don't even understand who I am. And I think that is, in my mind, that's what angered God. And I think the reason David got angry and David got afraid is he was both of those. He'd gotten complacent with his relationship with God, and he knew that he had done things that should have had more severe consequences than touching the ark to keep it from falling. And now he's afraid. So I can put myself in Uzzah's place because I get very complacent with the sins that I commit that don't have consequences immediately. It's okay. And it's hard to stop committing those sins unless I see a consequence.
Interesting.
Yeah, to me, it speaks to the point about worship that there is an order to worship. It can't be careless and reckless, but it's like touching the ark, which was representative of the presence of God. That you do not attempt to manipulate the Holy Spirit, the work of God, and in effect, in this, that was revival to me. It wasn't necessarily a good thing, but it exposed so much and educated the people. and they began to fear God again.
See, I believe that these are in the Bible so that we can look at it and come up with our own conclusion. Scholars have discussed this for forever. Why did this happen? What does it mean? Is God an angry God or not? You know, what's the difference between the first parade and the second? Interesting thoughts from both of you. Anyone else?
If the cover was 24 by 36 by 4 inches,
You got to figure it out.
in solid, it's 2,400 pounds and $54 million in gold.
That's why it doesn't exist anymore. So how many people would it take to carry that?
One more thought. In the New Testament, we have a couple, Ananias and Sapphira. Similar thing going on here.
And,
They were fined
and
a whole-
previously we have the story of Korah
Yeah. And Achan.
and Achan, yes, and Judges.
Yep.
Or is it? It's in Joshua, I guess.
But God also says, like in the Valley of Achor, the Valley of Judgment, that's where, oftentimes, where revival comes from.
Anyone else? God bless you.